All right, guys, this is NorvellCentral coming back at you on the YouTube video, and I got a very, very, very special guest with me today. It's serious when Florida State football is less than 2 weeks away as we're playing New Mexico State in the great CW network. Don't you forget about it. But, man, how are you doing today?
I'm good, man. I actually need to check my cable package to make sure I get the CW. But either way, man, I'm just excited for Florida State football to be back in like 10 days now.
Yeah.
We always joke on our channel, like it doesn't matter, good, bad, or ugly. We're like bugs to a bug zapper, man. We're coming back to the light. And so I'm ready for kickoff, man. I'm ready to go.
Yeah, and if you can't see by his hat, Plant the Spear. He's got a website. He's got his message board. He's big time now. He went to ACC kickoff. We'll ask him about that in a couple minutes. I have my Noles games day suck hat on, and think about it. Noon games suck, Friday night games suck. The ACC is just killing us in all kind of different facets at this point. And dude, I'm super excited for the year. Let me just go in first and kind of get this off my chest because I know you went to ACC kickoff. I know you've spoken to a couple of individuals up there. How was your experience there?
Oh man, it's so much fun because at Plant the Spear, we're a fan site. And so we try to do everything that the big sites do. We try to kind of be that bridge between fan sites and the legacy media sites. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, the way Florida State's credentialing system is set up, we just can't get credentialed. Like we've tried to get our foot in the door and we can't. So that is the one opportunity that we get to be credentialed. And really, from a fan's perspective, live out the dream of why we do this. And so, man, it was a great time. Like I was able to it may have only been about 7 minutes, but I interviewed Jimbo Fisher, which was probably one of the top 5 coolest things I've done since I started Plant the Spear. Of course, we got to talk to all the players, interviewed Deuce Robinson for like 20 minutes, which was super cool. At the same time, man, I will say that it's a lot of coach speak. Everybody's excited. Everybody's bigger, stronger, faster when they're at the podium. And so I take everything that I hear there with a grain of salt, but at the same time, it's so much fun because you do get to talk with basically everybody in the conference and you get to live that dream for at least a couple days at a time. So it's a grind. It's a lot of work. It gives me, a new bit of respect for the media that does this for a living, but I love it, man. It's a great time. And we'll have to get you up here some year, man. I'm telling you, you'll love it too.
No doubt, man. And like I said, there's no secret. The elephant's in the room. My name has Norvell's name in it. I mean, Obviously, the hot seat is getting hotter. Fans are talking about it. Media is talking about it. There's just a lot of things going on. When you talk to Mike Norvell and you kind of going through those questions and kind of going through, the yin and the yang with him, the coach speak and going through that, do you feel there's like a sense of confidence with him going into this year? Or do you think it's more so maybe a reserved feeling that maybe he doesn't want to get too overconfident?
Actually, the funny thing is, look, there's no way to beat around the bush. Mike Norvell is the king of coach speak. He will give you 5,000 words and say nothing. That said, my co-host Michael, kind of asked him went straight for the jugular, right? Asked him a question like, hey, man, you say you know what this looks like, but 4 of your 6 years here have been losing seasons. Like, what can you say to the fans to bring belief that you're going to be able to bring this back to Florida State standard? And I thought that brought out the most realistic answer that we've probably ever heard Mike Norvell say during his tenure at Florida State. And that was that simply words don't matter. Now, he said about 1,000 words after that, but words don't matter. Actions have to matter. Nothing I can say means anything unless they go and back it up on the grass on, Friday, Saturday, Monday, whatever days we're playing this year. And I think that was important because, last year in 24, there was a lot of ahead of the 25 season. There was a lot of the rah-rah, the Southern Baptist Mike and all that stuff that we know that he does most of the time. But this year seemed a little bit more reserved, a little bit less rah-rah, and a little bit more like, he said 100 times that he's not scared like he's coaching for his job, but I think he knows the reality of the situation. And I think he knows this is a very, very important year for not only Florida State, but his tenure. And that's kind of the vibe that I got. And I will also say, talking to the team up there, or the 3 members that were there, Ashton Daniels, Jabril Rawls, and Deuce Robinson. Deuce Robinson was asked directly, do you guys feel the pressure of Mike Norvell being on the hot seat and essentially saying that, you hold his job in your hands? And Deuce Robinson said, yeah, life ain't fair, man. That's just how it is sometimes. And we hear it. We know it. We understand that. And of course, he defended his coach. But so I think the team as a whole, Mike Norvell as a whole, they know the pressure they're under this year. And they know that words don't matter. You got to respond with wins and losses.
Yeah, and you said it perfectly in that last sentence, response. He always preaches it, but
Right.
it never happens. I mean, you haven't won a road game since November of 2023. And obviously, we don't want to highlight this as being more of a negative Nancy type of speak, but I mean, you have to
For
be
sure.
honest with yourself. I mean, this is a program that is used to winning championships, used to be competing. And just, basically 3 years ago, you were snuffed from a playoff opportunity, and then it went all downhill.
Yeah.
I kind of want to talk to you about this too, because I think this is something a lot of fans are kind of eager to see your thought process on this. But like looking at last year, you had the high of beating Alabama. You played the East Texas A&M and the Kent State. So you started 3-0. You went on the road to play Virginia, and you basically had an opportunity to basically go up 2 scores in that game, scoring 28 unanswered. Jerry Wilson dropped the pick. They were able to score it and tie it up, and then kind of you went through some different things there. With the schedule looking this year, and you're kind of looking at a different couple of pieces there, is there any kind of games that you can say, okay, obviously you have the early showdown against SMU, you have it against Alabama, but is there any like Virginia game on there that you think could possibly cause you some hiccups to kind of derail your season or uplift your season in a good thing?
It's actually hilarious that you bring this up because it's Virginia again this year. Like I honestly think there's 2, and I'll get to the second one in a second. But I think the first one is Virginia. Because you come out and I look at this schedule kind of in like a 7-5 perspective, not 7 and 5, a 7 then 5, because you get 7 games, then you get the bye week, then you get the last 5. And the reason I say that is because in those first 7 games, the schedule does you 0 favors, right? I mean, you obviously you better beat New Mexico State. And you better beat Central Arkansas. But, you beat New Mexico State. You go into that game against SMU. I'm giving them a good chance of winning that game. Going on the road to beat Alabama, I don't feel so confident in. Again, you just have to be realistic about the road struggles that they have. And Alabama's been 13-1 at home under Kalen DeBoer, right? Their only loss was to Oklahoma last year by 2 points. I don't see you winning that game. So then you beat Central Arkansas. But at that point, if you're going to keep your, stay in the fight, get up off the mat, and because you're not going to prove anything against Central Arkansas coming off a potential loss at Alabama, whether it be close, whether it be bad, whatever it may be, Lord knows if you win, I mean, hey, we might be looking at something crazy this year. But I think you have to circle that Virginia game, because if you go into that game and you lose on the backside of that, you realistically have 2 really tough asks for that team to go on the road and beat Louisville, who's a preseason top 25, and then beat Miami, who's a preseason top 10 team on the road. So, I think you have, I hate saying must wins because you really need to, every game's a must win, right? I think that is a cannot lose game. And that is also, what if you lose SMU and Alabama? You cannot go into that 2-game stretch at 3-3. Or, 2-4 or whatever it is, 2-3. Because then you could end up 2-5 going into that bye week, and Mike Norvell could get fired. The season could come off the rails, and we could be looking at a 3-9 season. And that's just a reality of the situation. So to me, I think you need to be going into that Louisville-Miami stretch at 4-1 to give you the confidence to go beat Virginia and go hang with Louisville and then Miami. And then the second game that I was referring to is Clemson. To me, that is the first game of the back 5, and that is the hinge game on that back 5, because you're probably going to be coming off 2 losses. If you hit 3 in a row, man, that's going to be, again, the season is looking at coming unraveled here, and that's what I worry about. Now, you got a winnable game at Boston College on the backside of that if the team is still invested. If they hang it up like they did last year, when they got whooped by Florida and all that, then you can see things coming unraveled. But to me, those are the 2 big games, because if you can rebound after a potential tough stretch and upset Clemson at home with a Boston College game that's winnable on the backside, I think you can kind of pick yourself up off the mat and salvage the back half of your season. Because to me, there's more winnable games on the backside of that schedule, that back 5, than there is the front 7 outside of the 2. But can you get there with this team still invested and intact and the head coach intact and all those things? To me, those are the 2 big swing games. And it just so happened to be that Virginia is the one I have circled again this year.
Yeah, and it's really ugly to think about. If you have a Virginia team that comes into Doak Campbell Stadium, and I know it's not the same intimidating environment, it's still a very, very good environment. Obviously, the crowd attendance has went down a little bit more in terms of stadium capacity, but it just seems like Florida State is, when you have, a Mason Heinschel that goes into your
Yeah.
home crowd and beats you as a true freshman. Basically avoids sacks, being able to get crucial third downs. Desmond Reed looks like a Heisman winner.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just looks like there's just a lot of different things. I mean, I was just sitting in Doak Campbell Stadium kind of just crushed because this program just decided to do it again, getting
Yeah.
embarrassed. I mean, it almost felt like the North Carolina game where they kicked a game-winning field goal back in 2016 all over again, just mocking you, It seems like all the time, and you talk about Central Arkansas, but I mean, I was right behind Zarek Cooper's parents when he hit that Hail Mary at the very end of the game.
I was in row one behind their bench, so
Yeah.
we were probably close to each other.
I mean, I don't understand the whole aspect of like Florida State, and just you got to make Doak good again. I understand, you beat a quality, Wake Forest team last year. You beat Alabama, obviously. I mean, you even beat, Virginia Tech, who I think was solid, at times with their playmakers, but you left a lot to be desired, the last couple of years. When you've won 3 ACC games in 2 years, I mean, that goes a lot to say it.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point because last year you look at they were 5-3 at home. They beat the brakes off Alabama. They literally beat the brakes off a pretty solid Wake Forest team. That's a team that beat SMU last year. Yeah. And then they beat Virginia Tech, who Virginia Tech wasn't good, but like you said, they had a couple pieces here and there. And so you end up going 5-3 at home. And so I think in that you have to win the games at home. You really have to capitalize on that because realistically, man, like when I saw the schedule come out and you're talking about Louisville on a Friday night, at Alabama, at Miami, Pitt on a Friday night, coming off a short week after going all the way to Boston College, my immediate gut reaction is like, okay, you're probably going 1-4 on the road this year. Like you're going to snap the streak, but it's probably going to be 1-4, 2-3 at best, if you can pull an upset somewhere. And so to me, that means you have to win the games at home. And those games, again, throw the two cupcakes out. The two most winnable games, it feels like at home, are Virginia and then NC State towards the end of the year. And so, like, you think about what Virginia had going last year, the Friday night, the juju of 1995 and the double overtime, and Florida State just basically gave them that game. I mean, kudos to Tony Elliott and the Cavaliers for winning 11 games when they had won 11 games the 3 years before that combined.
Yes.
Can they sustain that with a lot of pieces being changed on that offense? That's a game you got to win at home. So, yeah, man, to me, if you want to have the season that you got to have, the home games are where it's going to count. You need to have an Alabama-esque game against SMU, and then you have to go and win those other two games that I'm talking about, because then at least right there, you are automatically at 5 wins, right? And then if you can beat Boston College, you're at least bowl eligible, and then maybe you pull a couple upsets here and there to get to 8 wins.
So let me ask you this then, because I'll go ahead and rip the Band-Aid off. It's so boring nowadays to talk about W's and L's, because I know you actually got something that's going to be coming up about that too, and I know the season's right around the corner. What is your realistic, like, when you look at this schedule, and I know you talked about it before with the road games, struggles are probably going to be coming on the road. Do you think, 7 or 8 wins is possible for this team?
I do. I mean, I do. Now, let me say a couple things on that. First off, for them to hit 8 wins, and I know, like, let me start here. There are a lot of people that, myself included, and you brought this up, the standard at Florida State is championships. The standard is far from 8-4. But I think in this era where teams can spend openly, and we've just heard there was something released by CBS like yesterday that said Florida State is spending about $20 million on their roster, which is about where a lot of the ACC outside of like Miami is. You're seeing compression, right? So you're seeing a lot of teams that are able to kind of almost get on the same footing as you, because we know Mike Norvell struggles to recruit anyway. So if you're not having an NIL advantage and you're not really winning either, the talent is kind of flattening out. And so I think to look at this schedule, if it ends up being a top 20 type schedule, an 8-4 season is not terrible, right? It's not terrible. You look at maybe like Miami's schedule or something like that. Maybe you do win 9 games, right? To get to 8 wins, you're going to have to, one, do the little things right. Deuce Robinson talked about that a lot. You obviously, last year, you lost 4 one-score games. You had 4 one-score games. You lost 4 one-score games. And you could really throw NC State into that bucket too, because it was a one-score game until about 2 minutes left when you had a punt doink off your head. Like, you had opportunities to win. So those are the things. When you look at this schedule realistically, right now, outside of the 2 cupcakes, I mean, what games are you going to be favored in? Virginia at home by maybe a 6.5. Boston College on the road, maybe NC State by 6.5. I don't think you're going to be a double-digit favorite in any game besides those 2. So, to me, you have to do the little things right. You cannot give away possessions. You cannot have stupid penalties. You cannot miss tackles and blow coverages and things like that. You have to play at your highest level for 12 weeks. And then on top of that, it really hinges on this offensive line. Like, you have enough skill potential for this to be an 8 or 9 win team, but you have enough question marks on the offensive line, the defensive line, and at quarterback for this to be a 7-loss team. So to me, there's a few things that have to shake out your way, but I do think they can win 8 games. But I can also see them winning 4, which is crazy to think. But when you go back to, like, man, we've seen 23-4 followed by 7-17. How can you really stick a number on this team?
Yeah, I totally agree, man. It's like the elephant is in the room at this point. You know, everybody's talking about Ashton Daniels and how Mike Norvell named it a starter really kind of early. And, you know, you spoke to him too. I mean, he's a very confident kid. He's very quiet, you know, very to himself, not really super outgoing. He's not going to say, you know, Nick Saban can't save you.
Yeah.
You know, go out there and do it, you know, the theatrics that he had that game and then kind of tumble down the season. I mean, Ashton Daniels, you know, they're banking a lot on Vanderbilt and the Alabama performance, you know, having over 800 total yards, 5 touchdowns, being able to rush the ball efficiently. But, I mean, realistically, this is a quarterback that's only had 28 career touchdowns and 24 interceptions. And that's what a lot of fans are looking at. And they're saying, are you really trusting this guy when we have Malachi Marshall, that was a top JUCO quarterback? And I'm not saying Malachi Marshall is the next coming of Jameis Winston, but I am saying is a very talented option. I am saying Kevin Sperry, even the inconsistencies aside, he is a very talented guy. I thought they were at least going to make sure, you know, you had the right decision. I do think it was the right decision to name Ashton Daniels quarterback. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But it is kind of concerning, like you said, with the offensive line. Herb Ham was actually asked today about the starting 5, and Tim Harris was asked about the starting 5 a couple of days before that. You know, are you going to have anything? Are you ready for the starting 5? And they're like, we're still ironing some things out. And then they mentioned Paul Bowling, and then they mentioned Andre Otto, and that might be a battle. So now you're looking at an offensive line that possibly has all 5 transfers again, no homegrown talent. And then you're kind of like, well, crap, you know, we've had all these guys that we've recruited through the high school ranks. Nobody's really developing. And I get it. Herb Hand has been experienced. He's been through many Power 4 organizations, and he's done the right necessary things in the offensive line last year with Luke Pettibone as well as Micah Pettis. Those guys are very good players. Yeah. They've done a lot of great things for you, despite their inconsistencies they had before at previous stops. I just think this comes to a point where the offensive line has got to be a big factor. And, you know, you talked about it before, Deuce Robinson, you know, Mekhi Danzy, you know, Javen Boggs, even a Jason Lopez, who you're seeing the true freshman darling, you know, Devin Carter, who's been a little bit more banged up. Tay Gelsey is another one they've listed. There's so many different guys in this offense that are great and that you can see a lot of potential from. Even the running back room, it's one of the more talented groups that Mike Norvell's even had, and he's even mentioned that at many times. But in terms of the offense, like, is there one like glaring, like, okay, this is very concerning? Like, is there anything that just stands out to you and says, oh gosh, we this might not be too good?
You know, I want to circle back to the quarterback conversation that you had. And it is funny because, like, even in that Jimbo interview I did, I asked him kind of like, you know, what can Florida State, what are the strengths they can lean on this year? And he's like, look, man, he said the same thing. Like, they have a lot of talent at the skill position if the guys in the trenches can allow them to use that, right? Can they leverage that talent? And I think when you go back to the quarterback conversation, like, look, I have not been shy about saying that I think Malachi Marshall is the best arm talent quarterback on the roster, right? If he was 200 pounds and here in the spring, I think he's your starter.
Yep. I
think the reason that a big part of why Ashton Daniels is the name starter, aside from, you know, Malachi Marshall getting a late start and, you know, being 170 pounds, is the offensive line. Because you have a guy who is bigger, you know, like 6'2", 230, can run the ball, can help that offensive line out if they're guys that struggle to block a little bit, right? He can help because Malachi Marshall, if you go back and watch his tape in JUCO, like the arm talent is off the charts. He's not a mobile guy. He's not a runner. And at 170 pounds, I mean, if he gets sacked 20 times, like how durable is he going to be? And so, yeah, I think that's a big part of why Ashton Daniels won the starting job. Obviously, he was brought in under Gus Malzahn, so I definitely think he was more of a fit for that system. I think that Malachi Marshall is more of a fit for Mike Norvell's kind of more pass-heavy system than Gus Malzahn, but yeah, man, I just look at Ashton Daniels and I'm like, okay, I look at what he did against Vanderbilt and Alabama last year. I think that's in there. I think that can be decent. I think when you look back to his time at Stanford, it was terrible, but he was on terrible teams with nothing around him. He's got a ton of skill talent around him this year. But to me, it still comes back to the offensive line because you got a backfield you can lean on. Like, to me, this team reminds me a lot of 2022. Right? A team coming off a 5-7 season, a team that you really want to run the ball. Like, remember back then, nobody wanted Jordan Travis to be the quarterback on that team. And he ended up being really good because he also had the run threat. And I think that's what you're leaning on this year with Ashton Daniels. So to me, you kind of want to lean on that offensive line run blocking like you did then. And that backfield, you know, you had a three-headed monster back then that we called in the backfield there. And so, you know, man, I look at it like you got three really good running backs and a mobile quarterback that you don't have to pass more than you essentially need to back the defense off. So you can kind of, in a way, hide Ashton Daniels' inefficiencies at quarterback in a way, but that only can be done if you can run the ball. If you can't run the ball, you're toast, man. If you can't sit there and drop back and be able to throw a little bit. Now, he's not a real drop back passer. You know, but if you can't run RPOs and stuff like that, you're in trouble. And so to me, I put my trust in Herb Hand because I think you brought up a good point where like people forget last year, like a lot of the struggles on that offensive line, they did own that, but a lot of that was Tommy holding the ball too long and stuff like that. But Luke Pettibon was a top 10 graded tackle in the SEC in 24 before he came over here. Luke Pettibon was a number 1 graded returning center per PFF coming back in the ACC. The pieces there were higher floors and higher ceilings than what you have now. Now, Florida State traded a little bit of that kind of ceiling for not having to do this again next year because they got a lot of guys with a little bit of run on them as far as eligibility goes. I feel good about Xavier Chaplin. Like, even if he's not vintage Xavier Chaplin, I think he's good enough. He's the best one you got on that line. But I mean, I'm worried. Like, you look at the center that you got, Braden Joyner, who he gave up the most pressures of any Power 4 center in the country last year. And then you got an FCS guy at one tackle and a G5 guy at a guard and a G5 guy at another guard that you can put at tackle, but you don't want him at tackle. So I trust Herb Hand, but I'm worried about, you know, the dinner can only be as good as the pieces you got, as the ingredients that are in the recipe, right? Like, you can be a master chef, but if you're cooking with, you know, some Sam's Choice ingredients, like it's only going to be so good. And so I'm not saying that's where we're at, but on paper, it does not look like we have high-end talent on the line of scrimmage. And as you know, man, like they say, games are won in the trenches, won and lost in the trenches. And so that, to me, if the offensive line can be in the neighborhood of where I'm not saying they got to be what they were last year. They can be close to that with the upgrades at skill talent. And Ashton Daniels is more of a durable runner to me. I think this offense can be top 30, right? But if that offense falls flat on its face, man, as you saw in 2024, if they don't go, nothing else goes.
I agree, man. I think there's a lot of good talent, especially homegrown guys that they've developed, and they've really seen a lot of flashes from. Sandman Thompson, for example, at the center position. He talked about how much Braden Joyner has been able to develop him as a center a little bit more. You know, Jonathan Daniels, who we haven't heard too much about at the tackle position, you got to make sure he's able to kind of get up in a span too. You know, Andre Otto, another one, they're kind of wanting to get up a little bit more. He's a junior right now, so he's going to probably have about 2 more years with the 5-for-5 rule. And then you're looking at, you know, another guy in Sean Perrette, who they just mentioned the other day. And I'm kind of surprised by him because, you know, you're able to play 4 out of the 5 positions and really kind of being able to be that guy that nobody really expected. Jaden Todd, for example. I mean, there's a lot of guys that they have homegrown, but you just got to play them. You just got to develop them. I mean, it's got to, at some point, you're going to have to do it. And I know Alex Atkins is clenching his fist right now, not wanting to do anything about it. Because guess what? Throughout his whole entire coaching career at Florida State, he has not really done much of anything. You know?
No, he could recruit. but he couldn't develop with the flip, man. And that's the thing. Like, if you go back and look, you know, and I know they had a good line in 22 and had a good line in 23. A lot of that was transferred. You know, that is what it is. But in 2024, Florida State had the worst rush offense in the ACC. He goes to LSU. He's their run game coordinator and tight ends coach, and they had the worst rushing offense in the SEC. So, like, I don't think there's any coincidence there. But I do like, I mean, I like Paul Balling. We were talking about this before we jumped on. Like, I watched his film when we signed him as a freshman against Clemson. You know, that was a game that Troy almost upset Clemson. And I immediately was like, okay, I get why they took this kid. But again, man, it's can you get the most out of the pieces that you have? And so far, like, yes, there are very valid concerns with Herb Hand's recruiting versus like Alex Atkins. But from a perspective of getting the most out of the pieces that you got, whether they're high end or not, that's where Herb Hand has shined a lot more than Alex Atkins. And that's why I at least trust him to give this offensive line a floor.
I agree. I think kind of going back to the point that you said before, the trenches are going to be a big thing that wins these games. And obviously the offensive line is great and all, but that defensive line didn't do much of your favors anytime last year either.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing I think a lot of people don't really think about is Darrell Jackson. He's no longer at Florida State.
Yeah.
Whether you, want to believe in him or not, losing a guy that's 6'5", 337 pounds, that's no slouch. And the problem is your whole offseason was, okay, the Desir twins are entering the portal. You have to get those guys back. Obviously, you probably played a pretty penny, probably about $3 million to keep both those guys in Tallahassee. You're having a guy like Kevin Wynn at the defensive tackle spot. You have heard nothing. I mean, crickets this whole offseason. He's been hurt. I mean, he only played in 4 games last year. Obviously, you don't have the redshirt rule and you're not really having to worry too much about that. But it's like, man, like you had to bring on Jordan Sanders. You basically let John Walker walk out of your campus, out of a visit, and then he goes to Ohio State, and then you got Diamante Diggs, who you're hoping to get more out of. He got hurt last year. You brought in a Rylan Kennedy who's only having 3.5 sacks his entire career at Texas A&M. Granted, he was behind some very talented guys.
Right.
You have a Jalen Anderson who was a very talented JUCO guy. I mean, there just isn't a whole lot of, man, like these guys want it. They get it. It's high production. It's not what you've seen before. And it's a lot of young, unproven guys that you're trying to step up and be there. And I mean, yeah, this defense did have 31 sacks last year, but 18 of them only come from the defensive line. So you're telling me 18 sacks in 12 games? I mean, that was, James Williams. That was Deontay McRae, who we're hoping has a little bit more of a better year this year. Jason Jenkins, who you didn't get much production from. There's just, man, it just makes me want to throw up just looking at these numbers. And I mean, like Coach Nick Williams, I think that was a tremendous get for Florida State. The coaching staff. I think he brings a young, energetic mind. He recruits very well. I think it's kind of a perfect compliment to a Terrence Knighton, who I don't think is a great recruiter by any means, but I do think he is a solid developer. He knows what Tony White wants to do in this defense. It's very multiple. I think they're going to use the jack position a lot more with Rylan Kennedy and Jalen Anderson this year. What are kind of your thoughts on the defensive line? Do you think there's anybody out there that can get you close to that double-digit sack ranking, or do you think, because Mandrell, he had 5 sacks in his last 6 games. You saw a lot of positive strides with him last year, but then, I mean, will he be double covered? Was twin brother kind of be able to step up to the fold?
Yeah.
Just a lot of question marks you have to answer.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing. Like, and you hit the nail on the head, man. When I look at this defensive line, I don't see anything that screams elite. And when I say elite gets thrown around way too much nowadays. I'm talking about Jared Verse, Braden Fisk, Jordan Davis at Georgia a few years ago, like when he picked up the TCU quarterback and carried him like a baby. Like, I'm talking about guys who are like game wrecking. I mean, you think about, like, I know they had Malachi Toney and I know they had Mark Fletcher and all that stuff, but you think about what that defensive line for Miami did last year, kind of drugged them through the playoffs, right? We don't have anything that screams that right now. I mean, you're talking about, like, again, Rylan Kennedy, a guy that has played over 25 snaps a whole 2 times in his college career. And now you're going to ask him to do the same thing that James Williams, you asked him to do last year, go from a package player to a full-time 3-down starter. And it didn't go well. And so, like, that's a big risk. I mean, Jalen Anderson, I love the attitude, the Joker mindset and all that type of stuff. But, man, how many times have you seen JUCO guys come in and really, really be impactful, right? I mean, he had great numbers at JUCO, but that's just a whole different level. I think the biggest concern for me on the defensive line is I have not heard but maybe one or two mentions of Kevin Wynn this whole fall camp. And that's a guy that they are putting a lot of stock in to be that kind of Darrell Jackson replacement, right? In a way, because he has that same kind of body type. And, man, again, he played 40 snaps last year. I know he was hurt. I know he was kind of redshirting a little bit there. But when you go back and you look at last year's snap counts, Darrell Jackson played like mid 500 snaps. A lot of times eating 2 and 3 blockers at a time, which frees up those defensive ends. And thinking of the Daniel Lyons played around 425 snaps. So that tells you that Kevin Wynn, if you're just kind of bumping everybody up one on the pecking order, you need him to play 400 snaps this year. So can he go from 40 to 400 and be an impact player? The only thing I've really heard about him this fall camp is that, yeah, he's in good enough shape to play more than 2 or 3 snaps at a time. Like, if he was just out there wrecking dudes, you would probably hear about that. Now, we've heard good things about Daniel Lyons, speaking of. There's been times where I watched him and he was the best defensive lineman on the field, but he's never really done it consistently. I don't think he's an elite guy, but I think he can be a quality ACC defensive lineman. I think you're really, really banking on the Twins, right? I think that's really what you're hoping for. Again, my concern is that you don't have a guy like Darrell Jackson Jr. in the middle of that defensive line freeing those guys up. But again, what they were able to do as true freshmen, if they really did take that step, the next, going into that second year of college strength and conditioning, I think those are the guys you paid for them. You need to see that money pay off. And so that's the 2 guys that I'm watching more than anything. Now, I will say, you kind of pair the defensive line with linebackers, and you feel like the linebackers were bad last year. There's no other way to say it. I feel real good about Chris Jones. I feel pretty good so far about Caleb LaValle. Like, if he really is, that guy that Chris Jones is talking about, then you feel pretty good about him. But outside of that, like, who's the next best linebacker you got? Isaiah Williams, a freshman? And so I think the jack position, to your point that you brought up, is going to be eminently important, because that is kind of that hybrid defensive end linebacker, to where if you don't have good defensive line depth and you can use that jack, then you only really got to run a 3-man front from a true defensive lineman standpoint. And you really can kind of get away with like 2 linebackers outside of that jack. So in a way, if Rylan Kennedy and Jalen Anderson can be really effective, and they don't feel like they had that guy last year, and they like both of them this year, that can kind of manufacture depth on that defensive line and hide depth issues at linebacker. And so to me, linebacker play will help reinforce that defensive line, because I think that's what happened a lot last year is, it wasn't great, and then the linebacker play was bad behind it. So if they can play off of each other this year, maybe you don't need elite. But, man, I mean, you're going to be playing teams like Miami, Alabama, Clemson, where, SMU's got one of the best offensive lines in the ACC. Somebody is going to have to pop. Somebody's going to have to step up and have that game-wrecking time, type of season. And, man, I miss having a Timmy Jernigan, right? I miss having a Braden Fisk. I miss having a lot of these guys, man, because I just don't see that on the roster. Now, I'm not saying these guys can't be good. You need someone to be better than good this year.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at a guy like Jordan Sanders, for example, has that body type, has 6'4", almost 340 pounds. But it's like he had 8 tackles last year at Texas State.
Yeah, couldn't be a starter at Texas State. Now you need him to be a depth guy at Florida State and make an impact. Like, that's crazy to me.
I just don't understand it. I don't understand why they're kind of relying on some of these guys, and I get it. They're hyping up Daniel Lyons, and they like him. And he even mentioned it in the press conference. It's an easy guy to like. He talks about him being a Nole. He stuck through it, even through the transfer portal era at this point in college football, and everyone wants to be, on new teams and get championships and different things like that. But you got a veteran like, Omar Graham, and also Blake Nicholson, who I know a lot of fans are indifferent about. I get it. I get their inconsistencies. I understand, Blake being a former 4-star, and it just seems like he's running through the motions sometimes, especially coming up in run support. Heck, I mean, you even saw in the Florida game, the linebackers looked like they were just caught in quicksand every time they tried to come up and run gaps. Yeah. And that's why Jaden Ball had 225 yards. Jeez, it bothers me to a point where, yes, I love Caleb LaValle. I think he's going to be a really good player for Florida State if he stays healthy. But the problem that bothered me last year, and me and Caleb had talked on a couple of different occasions and everything, he's like, man, I just can't get my foot right. I mean, every time I plant, it seems like I can't do it. And even Ernie Sims had talked about the other day, like he was going in misdirection a little bit, and he was trying to do a couple of drills. He couldn't even get off his foot. I mean, it was just coming to a point where it was so frustrating for him. He's a good kid. Don't get me wrong. He's a very hard worker. And you saw in that bowl game against UConn where he had the 9 tackles. He was being very upfront and being in run support. But it just seemed like there was a lot of different factors that were going into that. You can't base it off of just one performance. We talked about it before with Ashton Daniels, having that 2-game stretch there. You cannot bank your whole season on one game or 2 games. And I just think you have a guy in Chris Jones who had 135 tackles last year. He was able to come out through there, and, Ole Miss was able to sign him. And then the whole thing about Florida State getting off his commitment and undoing his signing and then going through that point, it's a weird thing in college football nowadays. You never know if they're going to sign, if they're not going to sign, whatever the case is. But it just seems like that linebacker core, and as Ernie Sims had talked about before, the physicality, the wanting to attack and be violent on the football and with proper technique, that's music to Florida State fans' ears. You don't see that very often. And you saw it throughout his career at most. He was putting people in hospital beds. And you don't see that. I mean, you don't want to see targeting calls left and right. Obviously, you don't want to see any of that. You don't want to see anybody's players get hurt, but you want to feel them. It's the same thing with Greg Reed and Marcus Lattimore, from the Chick-fil-A Bowl.
Yes, sir.
You need to see that. I mean, you need to see people literally afraid to get up and saying, you know what, I don't need to get anywhere near this guy ever again. And it comes to a point where, the linebackers have to be able to be physical. But the problem is, too, kind of like you saw last year, you can't have Elijah Herring going on a running back in a wheel route and say, good luck, man. There you go. Have fun. You cannot have that. And I think you talked about it before. Mekhi Gaber, I think, is another good guy that I think is a doable veteran in this defense. But the problem is he went to North Carolina last year, didn't really do too much. Did pretty well in Tony White's defense in stretches, but it's like, he had over 200 tackles in his career, but, man, it's like, really? Are you really relying on somebody that is, got hurt, has been injured, not really been the most consistent player, been around a couple of teams now at this point. He's trying to find his footing and trying to get, his senior season on a good note to where he can possibly get drafted. But, man, it's a weird situation with the linebackers. I like them. I think they're really good if they can stay healthy and if they can stay consistent. But, man, I just don't want to see Jaden Baugh and, even Mark Fletcher and other guys like that being able to run the football. It's just weird to me.
Yeah, I think the problem – now you got me nervous when you're talking about Caleb LaValle, because I thought he would – to me, that's a guy you're counting on to be more of your athletic linebacker who can cover that guy coming out on the wheel, right? When you talk about Chris Jones, like, that's a guy that when you look back at his history, you really don't want him in coverage. But he's a thumper, and he's a linebacker that I'm so happy that we got out of the portal. I think Ernie is going to make a big difference at the coaching position there. I will circle back and say Nick Williams, I think, also will make a big difference. I forgot to mention that. Just having a true edges coach, a guy that knows the position. But, man, at the linebacker position, like, Bayer to me is the wild card, right? Because you look back at his history and like, I know everybody will say, and again, Chris Jones is probably my number one favorite player on Florida State this year, because I just want a dude that goes crazy. You can see it in his eyes. He's got that crazy look, right? Yeah. He had 135 tackles last year, but he played 706 snaps, right? Yeah. You look back at Bayer, and what I find interesting, man, is like at Nebraska in the 24 season when he played under Tony White, he had, I think, 49 tackles in like 330 snaps. So he would have been on pace to have 100 tackles had he played 700 snaps like Chris Jones did. Then you also look at what he did at North Carolina last year. Like you said, he couldn't get a starting spot on that defense, which it was a dumpster fire to begin with. That said, he had 41 tackles. Our 2 leading linebackers had 43, and he played over 100 fewer snaps than our 2 starting linebackers did last year. So I worry because he hasn't really been healthy in camp, but if he can be a guy who can maybe step into that role, he's had pretty good coverage grades per PFF the last couple of years. I think he can be a guy that you can lean on a little bit. I really wish the freshman had not have gone down in that scrimmage, and he'd have been, because he needs every rep he can get to be ready to go. I think you'll see him in New Mexico State. I think it'll be like Azareye'h Thomas when he was a freshman. Like, you just won't be able to keep him off the field by the end of the season. You just hope you can keep him in the locker room if the staff falls apart. But man, it's still a concern for me, right? You need Blake Nicholson. This is his last year, man. This is his money year, right? He needs to step up and have a year. I don't expect much out of Omar Graham because I didn't expect much out of him to begin with, right? I think the biggest I think the biggest misstep this staff has had is not prioritizing the trenches, right? Because if you had dominant line play, maybe you get away with linebacker play, right? Maybe you stay in a 4-2-5 and you can hide a little bit of that linebacker play. But when you're running a 3-3-5, that's hard to hide. And I mean, again, like you go back to even both sides of the trenches. Like to me, you look back at 21-22 Georgia, right? When they won back-to-back national championships with a former walk-on at quarterback, Stetson Bennett. Now, Stetson does not get the credit for how good he was in college. But, like, because they were so dominant in the trenches, they didn't need some five-star quarterback, right? We seem to kind of build our teams the opposite way. We load the skill talent and neglect the trenches. And so that's when things like your linebackers get exposed. That's when things like good running backs can't run the ball because they don't have holes to run through. And so, yeah, man, I think the defensive line makes me a little bit more concerned about the linebackers, but the linebackers are still a concern. Now, I think they'll be better than they were last year for sure. With Ernie coaching them, with Chris Jones leading that group, I think they will be better, but it's hard to be worse. And teams figured that out, right? That's the bad thing, too. Teams figured that out pretty quick, and they exposed it. So you definitely, that's definitely something that I'm going to be watching in that SMU game because Kevin Jennings is a mobile guy who's a really good, probably the second best quarterback in the ACC. If he can expose that, you're going to have a problem going forward. But I do feel like there is potential for them to certainly get better this year, led by Chris Jones.
Yeah, for sure. And I know you talked about Kevin Jennings a little bit later in that point that you just made, but ESPN's already reported that his jam finger is good.
Yep, of course.
We need another hitman to go out there and jam his finger again. Right. Let's go pick up basketball or something and foul him, and let's go ahead and get another jam finger because we definitely need that. But no, in all seriousness, though, Kevin Jennings is a very good quarterback. I think we're going to have some trouble kind of going through him, but he also has a turnover issue with 13 interceptions. Has a couple fumbles to his name as well. So not necessarily he's the most dynamic quarterback that you're going to play this season, but he's up there.
Yeah.
I just think there's a lot of different things this defense can go through. And basically the defensive backs who we're going to discuss next is kind of that thing that everyone wants to see. I mean, they're not the reason you've been losing. You're not losing because of the defensive line or the linebackers or anything like that. The secondary was actually pretty good. Problem is, you probably lost one of your better secondary pieces last year in Earl Little, went over and transferred over to Ohio State. Kind of inconsistent last year. You saw flashes. He's probably one of the main reasons you beat Alabama last year. But then on top of it, too, Ashton Barker had a very good game as well in that. You have Jabril Rawls, who some people even say day 2 pick. They have a lot of NFL scouts kind of looking his way. And I think the biggest thing with him is just health. I think he's got to stay on the field. A 3-star from Pensacola, is a guy that Florida State really likes and wants to see him be successful. He's a nice guy, really, really good kid. And I know that he entered the transfer portal because I know all the news happened with Sertan, and they're trying to figure out a lot of different things there. And you bring in a guy like Blue Adams, who a lot of fans don't really know about, and that's the story of this team so far. You have also Nehemiah Chandler, who you brought in from South Alabama, one of the best man-to-man coverage corners in the game, but it's also in the Sun Belt. What are you going to expect from that? And I think one of the bigger question marks, I think, in this whole secondary is Quindarius Jones versus a Nehemiah Chandler. And they've talked about it before. I mean, Quindarius Jones, a former 3-star in Meridian, Mississippi, it's a guy they really like and has been around the program for quite some time, but he also suffered a season-ending injury last year. It's almost like a Diamante Diggs situation where it's like, man, are you really trusting somebody that's played pretty well at times at Florida State, specifically in that Cal game where we beat Mendoza? Hang your hat on that,
right? Hang the banner.
It's like it's kind of this thing where you're just like, okay, Quindarius Jones is your second best corner. Like, I mean, I get it. Carson Hobbs was probably not going to be. If he was going to be in your 2 deep, it was going to be pretty far down there. I mean, let's just be honest. But even guys like Charles Lester, for example, former 5-star / 4-star when they brought him down at the very end. He's a guy that Florida State hasn't really seen much from. I mean, it's more inconsistencies. Every time they ask the coaching staff like how he's doing, it's like inconsistent. He's had some flash moments here and there. Chauncey Gannon had that interception in one of the videos that the Florida State football account released and everything. And I know like Jamari Howard's also been a name they've been popping up too. But it's like that cornerback room is just, they're solid, But it's like, are they going to take the next step forward? Who is going to be that number 2 cornerback? If it is going to be, Quindarius Jones, who they are actually raving a little bit more about this offseason as we're kind of getting closer and closer to the season. But do you think that marriage between a Rawls and a Chandler and a Quindarius Jones, do you think that's going to work in the ACC?
I first want to talk about the coaching change, right? I don't hate it, right? I know a lot of people are kind of like, well, who the heck is Blue Adams, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's got some Power 4 experience as a cornerback coach. He's got some NFL experience as a cornerback coach. Look, man, Surtain could recruit amazing, but that secondary outside of that 23 season was really underperforming relative to its talent. So I don't hate the change there. And I will say that, like, let me start at the corners and then work my way to the safeties. I think Jabril Rawls, if he can stay healthy, I think that's kind of a lockdown guy that you feel good about, right? That's kind of, one of those, if he can stay healthy, to your point, like, you can just put him out there and you feel good that you can leave him alone and let him handle whoever probably the best target on the field is, right? But then you're looking at who's that other guy, right? Now, they've said that Q has been the steady guy, but I think when you talk about from a ceiling perspective, Nehemiah Chandler had 13 PBUs last year. That was almost more, maybe even more than Florida State's entire secondary had. So I think that's a high upside guy. But again, you're talking about, like you said, a great man-to-man guy and a defense that runs a lot of zone. So how well does he fit the system? And the one thing that I really wish they would do away with a little bit is that soft freaking coverage that they do, where they're like 10 yards off the line of scrimmage on 3rd and 5. It just makes no sense, man. Let these guys come up and play. That's why you were so terrible at completion percentage last year and being able to limit teams. And so, I definitely think that you have the talent, but it's like, when is it going to flash, right? When are you going to see that Charles Lester be somebody? Like, when are you going to see him get on the field and be able to make an impact in an actual game? Like, the recruiting rankings don't mean anything if you don't actually do anything with them. So I do like the 3 guys that you have, but you bring up a point, man. If anybody goes down and you have 2 guys that went down with injury last year, that depth gets real dicey behind them, right? That's why I think the number 1 key to this, well, I'll say the number 2 key to this season, we can maybe talk about that a little bit later, is you got to stay healthy. But I also think, like, when you move back to safety, I feel pretty good, right? Now, Carson Hobbs' injury, I know it hurts your depth, but, like, when I didn't like that tape. I'll just be honest. I'll just be frank. I watched this tape, didn't like it, didn't understand it. But I think Ashlyn Barker can have a really big year at Rover. And I think that can also help out the linebackers as well. Because he's 6'3", like 215. He's about 15 pounds shy of being a linebacker himself, but he's been excellent in coverage as well. I think he can actually be better than Earl Little. I think Earl Little is a little bit, a better athlete from that perspective. But again, when he came to Florida State, he hadn't played a lot, right? And not at that position. And so, he made the move to safety. And so I think, like, he may be good at Ohio State this year, but he also got a lot of experience at Florida State last year, a lot of in-game experience. And he was great during Alabama. Like, I was like, dude, this guy's like legit. And then just, the missed tackles against Virginia that cost a touchdown, the missed tackles against Pitt that cost a touchdown. Like, you just kept seeing these things show up. A lot of hesitation, a lot of not knowing where he's at. Barker has a lot of experience, at least a year of experience in this defense. He's a big, rangy, physical guy. I think he's going to have an all ACC type of year at safety. But who do you got outside of that, right? I mean, can it be KJ Kirkland? What's Mekhi Jones going to look like? I know they said they've been working him a little bit at nickel slot. So that's if you have to get into your depth, what are they going to do there? But I like the starters on the back end of this defense. It's if you have to get into the depth, that's where I start to get a little bit concerned. So to me, I think you made a great point. Like, it's not a lot of the secondary as to why they struggled. It's because they can't get pressure. And so you're having to cover for 3 and 4 seconds. And so, again, like, if the defensive line can do their job and create pressure, and I think one of the keys to the season, when you're talking about a lot of good quarterbacks you're going to be going against, you got to be able to create pressure without bringing extra guys. Like, you may need to get exotic on some blitzes. That's fine. Like, hey, I would say, a quarterback can't get a pass off if he's on the ground. So let's just keep it at that. But man, if you can not ask these guys to cover for 4 seconds like they did last year, I think the secondary can be pretty good, right? But to me, I look at that relationship just like I look at the offense, right? You got a lot of talent and skills, but can the trenches unlock that? You got a lot of talent in the secondary. Can the trenches unlock that? And so it's kind of, again, this ain't 7-on-7. This is 11-on-11. And so can the trenches unlock the skill positions? Because I think at the skill positions, you got 8 or 9 win talent, right? At the trenches, I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, you even said it at the safety position. You have plenty of talent. Ashton Barker is going to be a great guy, I think, at the rover position. Like you said, it's going to be utilized everywhere. But then you also have like KJ Kirkland. And KJ Kirkland actually talked to the media not too long ago about the 3 safety look. You cannot have, 2 safeties doing their job and then one guy just being like, oh, whatever, lackadaisical, just kind of do what you can. And, you talked about the Carson Hobbs take. Well, I didn't like Damari Brown whenever they brought him in.
Yeah,
I thought it was kind of a waste of a pick too. I mean, I just think there were a couple of times in the secondary where you're like, why are we doing this? Like,
could you not have invested that in a lineman? Gavin Blackwell at receiver last year. Could you not have invested that in a lineman?
It just seems like there's a lot of things that are, I'm not going to say wrong with this roster in terms of that, but there are a couple of pieces where you're like, okay, Trey Wisner, for example, he's been not really the healthiest thing in the world. You already had a Chroma who you've spent a lot of money on in the recruiting cycle. You have a Sam Singleton who's been very productive. You had an Amari Thomas who, while a true freshman, he has done some good things. Sands from FAU as well that we don't really hear about at all. He's another veteran back with pretty good stats as well with the Owls. So, I mean, there's a lot of guys that you can kind of bank on. And you're saying that you don't want musical chairs in the running back room, but now you're having musical chairs again. So it's like, what do you want with this? What are we going here? And I get it. I mean, like, as we go to like the special teams, like Mike Norvell talks about special teams, it's like the most foundation of a program. And he even said this in his introductory press conference. And, you got a guy like Panikowski, who's going to be your kicker, Ryan Fitzgerald, or not Ryan Fitzgerald, but Jake Weinberg. Sorry, Ryan. I don't even want to associate with you with this because your last year at Florida State was incredible. But, Jake Weinberg coming over and transferring over to Miami to that rival school over there, the thing is, too, I mean, it's like, yes, he can kick a 60-yard field goal, but you don't know where it's going. It could be, gosh, it's like it's 22-mile-an-hour wind and it's going way far right or way far left. You really don't know. And, I mean, that comes to the point of, like, game preparation. You can do it all day in a practice field, but when you get on the setting and go into Deccan Stadium when the lights are bright, will it happen? And, I mean, Gabe Panikowski's done a really good job so far in fall camp. He's hit anywhere between 45 and 55. They kind of feel comfortable in that range. Obviously, he might not be the kickoff specialist. We'll see if McNulty can be able to do that. But, Daniel Hughes has done a really good job. His net punt yardage has done really well, one of the tops in the country, in New Mexico. And he's an older guy. He's about 28 or 29 or 27, I think. He talked about starting his own business and everything's been very successful. It's not really been a guy that not a lot of people talk about because you don't want to hear about punt yardage and stuff like that. But, and then you go to the kickoff returners, Mekhi Danzy, who you really like his speed a lot. And then, you have the quote unquote freshman All-American at Sam Singleton, when he was able to do the performance that he had against the Duke Blue Devils, where it was the first loss in program history. But he was able to kind of get that 95-yard return for a touchdown. And you saw the flashes. You saw that.
Yeah.
But then the one thing I kind of worry about, not really worry about too much, but me and you both went to that NC State game last year. We saw Squirrel White was Squirrel White in that moment. And, also with the hitting off the back of your head of KJ Kirkland there at the end too, didn't do you any favors either. So you have a Jason Lopez who they're super excited about. He's a true freshman. We've seen Greg Reed start as a true freshman. I'm not even saying Greg Reed is even in the same sentence as Jason Lopez.
Yeah.
Jason Lopez is a very productive receiver. He had over 1,000 yards at Chaminade on all 4 of his years, and then also had 800 yards in his 8th grade year. This is a guy that knows how to get yardage. He knows how to be dynamic. And when you have a punt returner, I don't really care the age at this point. I want them to go out there and be able to make sure that this kick is not going to punt all the way back 20 yards and cost your offense 2 or 3 first downs. That is not something you want to see. And I think with Jason Lopez and how dynamic he is as a receiver, if he doesn't even play that much as a receiver, if they want to play Javen Boggs and Devin Carter and Tayshawn Gelsey and Mallory and all those guys, I mean, that's fine if you want to limit his role a little bit more to make sure he does this punt return duty job well, I think that's okay. But what's kind of your thought on the special teams? Do you think it got better? Do you think it got worse? What are some bright spots do you think that Florida State fans can kind of cling to in an aspect of a game that you really don't know or really get excited about?
Yeah, I think when you talk special teams, like we say a lot on our show, it doesn't always have to help you, but it certainly cannot hurt you. It cannot be a detriment to your team. And really, if you think about it, like special teams cost you that NC State game last year. You had a couple missed field goals. You had two muffed punts. One of them that basically gifted NC State the nail in the coffin, so to speak, right? And so, I mean, again, like you look back, I talk a lot about the little things. I published an article on our website the other day talking about how Florida State has to do the little things. Like in wins last year, Florida State was 4 or 5, 80% on field goals. In losses, they were 8 of 14 or 57.1% on field goals last year. So those are the things that kill you, right? Now, I am a little bit nervous about Panikowski because he didn't kick a field goal in a game last year. He was a backup player at Oklahoma State. But, I mean, Panikowski rides with Janikowski, so he's got to be somewhat good, right? So I'm at least hoping there's that. Like, man, just be consistent. That's all I ask, right? You don't want to have to rely. Now, one of Florida State's problems last year was they relied on 3 too often, not 6. So I think you don't want to kick too much. But I think, if you have a consistent kicker, again, man, you think back to that NC State game in 2022, right? You needed 3 points to win that game, and you didn't trust your kicker to be able to do that. So we're throwing, slot fades to a 5'9" receiver, right? You need someone who you can trust. I don't care if you're getting it from 60. Can you go 90% from 30, 35, right? That from 40 or less. I feel good about that. So that's what I'm hoping for. And I will say this, like John Papuchis was a wizard at blocking kicks. I don't know, like they could have kept him as just a kick blocking specialist, but the rest of the special teams was just kind of sucked, man. There's no way to say it. So I think the Coach Shire is going to bring a different element to that game. He's got a lot of experience as a special teams guy. He's not doing double duty, also trying to coach on defense as well. That's his sole focus. So I think that will elevate that position a little bit. As far as the punter, Daniel Hughes, like, I know people don't want to hear a lot about him, but you're probably going to need him this year. So, like, having a guy who can flip the field, like maybe that offensive line ain't great. If you can flip the field, that's going to be big for you, right? And so I think that's an important part as well. Now, as far as the returners go, man, again, if you're talking about Mekhi Danzy and Sam Singleton on kickoff return, that's elite level speed. And I was at Duke. Lord, again, another loss I've been to that I'd rather not remember. But, like, I mean, how long has it been since you held your breath when not, I mean, in a good way, right? A Greg Reed way, a P-Dub way, especially on like punt return. As we get into Jason Lopez, like how long has it been since you held your breath on a kick return or a punt return where you're like, man, this guy can take it to the house anytime he touches the ball? It's been since Greg Reed probably, right? Or Kermit Whitfield, in the 2013 years. But like, man, you just haven't had that element anymore in a long time. And so I think having that back will be huge for you. Now you hold your breath like, oh, God, are we going to catch it or not? And even with Jason Lopez, like, yes, having a true freshman back there does make me a little bit nervous. But as you said, he's a dynamic guy who's already shown he's got ridiculous hands. So, like, point number 1, catch the friggin' ball. I don't care if you return 1 punt yard this year. As long as you don't muff it, and as long as you are smart enough to know when to catch it and let it roll, like you said, look at all the hidden yardage we've lost over the past couple of years. Yeah, I think special teams will take a step this year. And when you're a team like Florida State that we talked about in the opening of the show, that's not going to be favored in a lot of games, and you're going to have to win in the margins, you're going to have to win on the little things. You need special teams to maybe be the difference in a 27-24 type of game. And I hope that you get a little bit more out of it than you had the last 2 years, because you really have, other than blocking kicks, you really haven't gotten anything out of the special teams.
I agree, man. I think special teams is going to be a big thing for Florida State this year. I think they're going to be kind of the glue guy. You're going to need special teams to be able to do anything this year. And, I mean, it may not be flashy. Florida State fans talk about all the time, like, why do we need this many tight ends? It's kind of the same philosophy. I mean, you need those guys because Mike Norvell does, call a lot on those tight ends that we barely even heard about this spring, really this spring, this fall camp. I mean, it's just been a lot of different moments where you've wanted to hear more guys from there, and you're just going to see more. And you talk about it all the time about like taking the next step. What about taking the climb that we've talked about before? Where's that climb aspect coming from? Because realistically, you go 3-6, you go 5-7, you go 10-3, 13-1. You're climbing. You're at the climax. You're getting to the point of like, hey, this 24 season is going to be really good. You're going to prove all the doubters wrong. You're going to get into the playoffs. And you saw what happened. You crumbled down, you crashed. You did the same thing in 2025. You crumbled and you crashed. And it comes to a point where, yes, I understand that a lot of people are off on Mike Norvell. I get it. I understand. We could talk about it for days. You can go to any other podcast on YouTube or any other things on ESPN or whatever the case is, hot seat list, whatever you want to say. They are going to have Mike Norvell in that. I promise you.
Yep.
The thing is, Florida State is a 6.5-point projected win-loss total at this point for this year. And is that Florida State standard? No. It's year 7. We have to do better than that. Do you think with all that we've talked about before, with all the concerns, with all the strengths, with everything that goes, do you think Mike Norvell maintains his job and stays another year in Tallahassee in 2027?
Man, well, first off, I just want to ask. I should have asked him this at media days. Like, I think Mike Norvell is so committed to the climb that it's like, dude, once you get to, you can't climb it if you're at the top. So it's like, bro, can you, when you get to the top, can we change the phrase to stay, right?
Yeah.
Instead of climb. So, I mean, realistically, if you think about it, right, we went from 3 to 5 to 10. Now we went from 2 to 5. So who knows what the season might be, right? We're on pace to climb right back up to maybe 9, 10, 11 wins or something like that. We'll see. Joking aside, though, man, there is an insane world out there, alternate universe, where Jordan Travis never gets hurt. And Mike Norvell may very well have a national championship to his name, right? Yep. Because I still die on the hill that 23 team with Jordan Travis at least gets into the playoffs. And potentially at least wins a playoff game or a national championship. And then does 24 ever even happen? I don't probably think so. Yeah. And so I think, man, when you look at this year, the question that a lot of us have in our mind as fans is, where is that line in the sand, right? Which is why, like, I am a Florida State fan. I don't get paid to do this. Yeah. I want Florida State to win. I will never openly cheer for Florida State to lose. But I think your best case scenario, and hear me out on this because it's going to sound crazy, your best case scenario has to be 8-4 or 4-8. It cannot be 6-6. It cannot be 7-5, because we saw last year this administration did not pull the trigger on firing him after one of the most embarrassing losses in I mean, he's given us a few, but one of the most in recent years, let's just say that. I won't say program history, at Stanford. Like, he should have been fired after that game. I think he thought he was getting fired after that game.
I agree.
And so, like, if they go 6-6 or they go 7-5, do they actually do it, or do they bring him back for another year? I think that's what all of us are wondering right now, because I do think that Michael Offer did kind of lay a gauntlet a little bit at the spring meetings in Amelia Island, where he said, like, look, we have given everything there needs to be to win a championship level football, right? To play to the Florida State standard. And I think that was kind of a message to Mike, like, you got what you need to do better than what you're doing. I'm not saying you're not spending $35-40 million on a roster, so I don't think they expect to win a national championship. But if you can't be in the running for Charlotte, if you can't win 8 or 9 games with what they're giving you in the state of Florida and the resources that you have, then he's got to go, man. And I think Michael Offer kind of sent him that message. Obviously, you don't leak the things about Lane Kiffin last year if you didn't at least think you were hunting for somebody. I think he wanted him fired and just got overruled because of the money aspect of things. Yeah. But, I think that if you go 8-4, this is why I say this. If you go 8-4, I think against a tough schedule like this, no, it's not up to the standard, but you put enough belief back in the program that you'll get money back in the program, which can help you win more games, right? If you go 4-8, he gets fired, you get a new coach, which probably also puts more NIL donations into the program. So either way, it's kind of a win-win. I don't want to see us go 4-8, but I've not been I've called for Mike Norvell to get fired after the Miami game last year. And just, man, because I look at what Miami's done, man. Like, you look at the trajectory of these programs, and they lapped you in your own building with 2 years less into their tenure. And so I just don't think he's the long-term answer, because the problem is, like, Mike Norvell can assemble a team. We saw that. But Mike Norvell does not do a great job of building a program. You're going to the portal too much. You're not recruiting well enough. You're not holding your staff accountable fast enough. And so to me, I think you need a program builder to come in here and get some excitement out of the donors. And so, like, if you can win 8 games, I think he's going to come back. And I think that's fair. Against this schedule, I think he's earned that right. If you go 6-6, 7-5, I'm nervous that they're not going to pull that trigger. But I think if you go 5-7, 4-8, something like that, I think they got no choice to fire him. And I mean, I am cautiously optimistic on this season. I also see a point where we talked about that 7-5 perspective, the 7 games and the 5. I think you could be looking at that bye week after Miami between Clemson, where you're 3-4, 2-5, and he gets fired midseason. And I think that's a very realistic possibility. I really, really do. I don't think it's best for the university to pay that much money. And one very, very back burner thing to keep in the back of your mind that I will at least point out is keep your eye on what this Protect College Sports Act bill is going to look like, because if it passes and that 180-day grace period gets added, Florida State essentially has to leave. If they want to leave the ACC without going independent, they have to do it next year, because if it passes, it's too late this year, and 2028 will be outside of the grace window. That's going to come with a 9-figure price tag. So do they want to pay? Because I think their priority is, look, if we have to jump now to leave the ACC, we're going to do it, right? That's priority number one. Can they afford to pay 9 figures and then buy Mike Norvell out as well if things go bad? So that, to me, is something that doesn't really get talked about a lot, that I think people should keep in the back of their mind. Now, I know that bill's lost some traction and stuff like that, but I'm sure the higher-ups have not. They're paying attention to it, right? And so, man, again, like, the question for me is where is the line in the sand? Because this is not good enough. And the longer you let it go, the harder this mess is going to be to clean up.
1,000% agree. I think you've made some really, really good points. Before I let you go today, got a thing for you. Got a question.
Uh-oh.
So you said that you've been to Jacksonville State. You've been to Duke. You've been to NC State. What games are you going to this year, so I can go ahead and count those losses in my head right now?
Okay, let me first say I was at the national championship game.
Yeah.
All right. I've been to 4 ACC championship games, and we're undefeated in those games. So, like, if we get to a title game, like, put me on staff. I need to be there, right? So yeah, I will be at the SMU game this year. So I was already kind of counting on a strong start, maybe not. And in Virginia, I will be at that game as well. Clemson, I'm going to go to that one. And in NC State, I'm on the fence. Like, look, man, I live 7 hours from Tallahassee. I live around Charlotte, North Carolina area. I drove 7 hours to Tallahassee in 2024 to watch a 2-9 team take on Florida and get whipped. I knew what was coming in that game. I said, screw it. I got the tickets. I'm going anyway. I'm committed to this for life, but like that NC State game, man, if we're like a 2 or 3 win team with under an interim staff, like my couch might be looking pretty good for that week.
Yeah, might be NorvellCentral pretty soon at that point.
I love it. Just don't let it be Tom Herman Central, please.
No, oh gosh. Yeah, that's another discussion for another day.
Yeah.
But man, I'm super excited. This season's going to be phenomenal. I hope. Florida State fans, regardless of the results and how it is, we've got a lot of exciting games coming on. Plant the Spear's got some incredible content coming out. Like I said, he's done a phenomenal job with his website, building a lot of different social media platforms and getting all those up, especially building your own website, man. That's phenomenal. Please go check that out. He's got some great content, great analysis. I'm super excited to see how Florida State kind of closes out and hopefully ends up being a productive season for Florida State fans to enjoy and just have a great time. We haven't seen it. We haven't really felt that in a couple of years.
Yeah.
Florida State fans deserve this type of, relief, that you want to see from just a productive program. And, we need to see it again. So,
yep.
Hopefully on August 29th, we're going to have Doak Campbell Stadium rocking on that great CW network. Crisp 7 o'clock kickoff time. It's probably still going to be scorching hot in Tallahassee. But, man, I'm super excited for the year. I appreciate you coming on, man. It's been a great conversation and everything. Be sure to go follow or subscribe to his YouTube channel. He does a lot of great stuff over there. Him and Michael are doing a phenomenal job super excited to see what it does, and we'll definitely have to collab again for sure.
Yes, sir. Yeah, man, for sure. And, you know, I will say the thing about this season, you're right. Florida State fans deserve something because so far under Mike Norvell, like the problem is like, bro, give us just a middle ground, right? It's either really good or really terrible. Like you think about it, man, I came up in the lost decade, and a lot of you guys know what that is, where like we were always a bowl team. Sometimes we'd sneak up and win 9 games. You could have some fun moments, right? You could beat Miami or Florida in that. Like you could do those types of things, man. Just there's no fun when you're going 2 and 3 and 5 win seasons. So hopefully, you know, again, 8 wins ain't where we want to be, but like you can have some fun during an 8-win season. And I would like to, you're going to know quick, right? With SMU and Alabama in the first 3 games, you're going to know what this team's going to do pretty quick. So Florida State fans, I know, will show up and show out regardless. I know that Virginia Tech game, I was there last year. Look, man, the season was lost, but the energy wasn't what it was in Alabama, but the stadium was still packed. So I know everybody's going to show up and show out, man. And there is nothing that I love more than being in Doak Campbell Stadium on whatever day we decide to play, like Saturdays, Fridays, whatever day it is.
Yeah.
I love tailgating. I love connecting with our listeners, our friends, our fans, man. It's the best place to be. And so, man, I just can't wait for the season to be back. I can't wait for Florida State football to be back. Hopefully, I don't hope it's over before it starts, right?
Yeah.
You hope so. But yeah, man, I would love to have everybody come along for the ride with us because, you know, like you, like me, you know, we do this because we love it. We do it for the passion of Florida State, and we're going to be here with you guys. We're going to be riding the highs. We're going to be riding the lows. You know, no shot at the legacy sites or anything like that, but like they're even keel, man, because a lot of them get paid. This is just a job. Like we share the emotion with you guys, so it's a great time to lock in with the fan outlets, man. We love what we do, and I can't wait to be back at it, man. Less than 10 days. I cannot wait.
It is so great, man. Well, like I said, guys, I appreciate you watching the video today. It's been great. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment your thoughts on what you thought about some of our viewpoints. I know we have a lot of different viewpoints we went through today. Over an hour-long video that we had today. I know I'm trying to get more into these content series because I'm going to start doing some Tuesday, Thursday, or Tuesday, Friday type of videos again. Super excited for the season, man. It's here. I mean, we are finally here. And, man, I just cannot wait. But, again, I appreciate all the love and support. And, as always, go Noles.
Go Noles.